You should definitely understand the contact tracing applications that are being set up with our mobile devices. There are mobile applications that can enable digital contact tracing on a large scale. South Korea, Singapore, Australia, and of course China have already implemented this. Britain is right now working on the implementation of this in their country. Tech giants Apple and Google have pledged to work together to bring this contact tracing ability to the masses around the world. Here's a press release from Apple put out April 10th of this year, 2020. Across the world, governments and health authorities are working together to find solutions to the COVID-19 pandemic, to protect people and get society back up and running. Software developers are contributing by crafting technical tools to help combat the virus and save lives. In the spirit of collaboration, Google and Apple are announcing a joint effort to enable the use of Bluetooth technology to help governments and health agencies reduce the spread of the virus, with user privacy and security central to the design. Since COVID-19 can be transmitted through close proximity to affected individuals, public health officials have identified contact tracing as a valuable tool to help contain its spread. A number of leading public health authorities, universities, and NGOs around the world have been doing important work to develop opt-in contact tracing technology. To further this cause, Apple and Google will be launching a comprehensive solution that includes application programming interfaces, APIs, and operating system level technology to assist in enabling contact tracing. Given the urgent need, the plan is to implement the solution in 2 steps while maintaining strong protection around user privacy. First, in May, both companies will release APIs that enable interoperability between Android and iOS devices using apps from public health authorities. These official apps will be available for users to download via their respective app stores. Second, in the coming months, Apple and Google will work to enable a broader Bluetooth-based contact tracing platform by building this functionality into the underlying platforms. This is a more robust solution than an API and would allow more individuals to participate if they choose to opt in, as well as enable interaction with the broader ecosystem of apps and government health authorities. Privacy, transparency, and consent are of utmost importance in this effort, and we look forward to building this functionality in consultation with interested stakeholders. We will openly publish information about our work for others to analyze. So you should understand what this all means. Basically, Apple and Google will provide programming in their mobile devices that assists with contact tracing. Have you noticed that sometimes when you download an app on your phone, it asks you if you want to allow it to use Bluetooth? Apps that should have nothing to do with Bluetooth. That's because Bluetooth isn't just allowing your devices to communicate with each other, it's allowing your device to communicate with other people's devices as well. So basically, as you move throughout society, your device will send signals to other people's devices so that if you came in contact with someone that was diagnosed with the virus, your phone would send you an alert and tell you that you need to self-quarantine. The applications also will be able to record where you are and the people that you've been around and in contact with. Just like that clip from Contagion when the doctor was asking Matt Damon's character all those questions.
Contacted livestock in the infected home. Did she mention seeing anyone who was sick? Anyone on a plane?
That was a personal form of contact tracing. Now our devices will do the jobs that these doctors used to, without us even thinking about it. What I provided was an oversimplification of a very complicated system, but it's something that you have to know and understand. It's already been implemented in other countries around the world, and if you just look into what China has been doing, it's very easy to see exactly how far this can actually go and what it may mean for your life. But really, what should it mean to you? I'm certain that people that are gripped with fear by this virus may look at this technology as a good thing. But all this is allowing technology to have more access into our lives. We are letting apps know too much about our lives, where we are, and who we are around. And from this, they are now implementing it into how they will govern our lives. So as you go out and engage in society, it's quite possible that you come around people that have been infected with the virus, and then your phone tells you that you need to self-quarantine.
China goes even further, assigning citizens a colour-coded level based on their health condition and travel history, which determines whether they're allowed into malls or public transport, for example. South Korea is sharing previous movements of COVID-19 patients, which has led to residents being outed for non-COVID-19 related reasons and public shaming. Israel has an app that warns users if they've crossed paths with an infected patient, and Taiwan has introduced a digital fence using smartphone data to enforce quarantines. All novel ideas which perhaps in ordinary times would come under heavier scrutiny where rights issues are concerned. Yvonne Yong, ABC News.
And that's scary by itself, but we haven't even thought about what the government enforcement looks like. Understand that the government can force you into quarantine. If you live in a country like China, this statement probably isn't something that shocks you. But here in the United States, most people living here do not completely have this understanding. And if it is able to happen here in the United States, wherever you live around the world, it can happen there too. On the CDC website, you can see clearly that federal isolation and quarantine are authorized for these communicable diseases, and they have listed severe acute respiratory syndromes and flu that can cause a pandemic. This is COVID-19. Large-scale isolation and quarantine was last enforced during the influenza, Spanish flu pandemic in 1918 to 1919. In recent history, only a few public health events have prompted a federal isolation or quarantine orders. According to United States Code Title 42, Sections 264 to 272, any person who violates any regulation prescribed under Sections 264 to 266 of this title, or who enters or departs from the limits of any quarantine station, ground, or anchorage in disregard of quarantine rules and regulations, or without permission of the quarantine officer in charge, shall be punished by a fine of not more than $1,000 or by imprisonment for not more than 1 year, or both. They can imprison you. During the first wave, Trump gave the states the authority to manage the pandemic. But when the second wave comes, you should expect that the federal government will take a much bigger hand in things. They just recently introduced a bill in the House called H.R. 6666. You really can't make this stuff up. This bill lacks a lot of details, but its summarized purpose is to authorize the Secretary of Health and Human Services to award grants to eligible entities to conduct diagnostic testing for COVID-19 and related activities such as contact tracing through mobile health units and, as necessary, at individuals' residences and for other purposes. So they would be giving money to eligible entities, whoever that would mean, to conduct testing and contact tracing through mobile health units, very much like I just explained with the mobile applications. They also will be allowed to go to our residences according to this bill. Now mind you, this bill has not passed, and not much information is given as to how this would even look. But this needs to be in your mindset that they are even suggesting legislation like this. By the number of the bill, the devil is obviously in the details. In my expectations, I am preparing for the likelihood of this pandemic resembling the Spanish flu as far as the narrative goes. So as restrictions are easing up and people are becoming more relaxed in their expectations, I will continue to keep my eyes open and make sure that I am preparing.
This is a big deal. So Europe rolls out contact tracing apps with hope and trepidation. It says Italy and Germany activated apps this week as tools to avoid a second wave of CV infections, fueling a debate about privacy rights. Now, this is a huge deal, and people need to start talking about this because it is going in under this pandemic here, but it's not going to stop. And what's crazy about this is we have public officials saying essentially that this is actually going to go way past the CV epidemic here. It says out of Rome that when 3 people in the northern Italian region of Liguria tested positive for the CV last week, they gave their doctors permission to punch into a national server anonymous codes generated by a new contact tracing app on their phones. Moments later, the phones of people who had also voluntarily downloaded the app and had come into contact with them buzzed with an alert. So imagine you're walking down the street, your pocket starts violently vibrating, and you see somebody on the other side walking their dog. Well, that's because that person walking their dog apparently tested positive for CV. You walk the opposite way, you're in safety, and you're away from this person who tested positive, and everybody's good. That is kind of the hopes for this. Among other surveys and things they want to do, and these are guinea pig type things. They're experimenting with the country. You get to see all this data and data going around. But is that really just all of what it is? The thing is now with some politicians and some people that are actually coming out and saying that a lot of this stuff will actually continue past when this is far gone, it has some people raising their eyebrows saying, what the hell is this? Again, this is something that is not only kicking in, it's not something you can really stop. Now, right now it is voluntary, but I've already heard from a lot of our military group stating that in the next 6 months that military will be required to do these kind of things, and it will actually be attached to other things as well. So if they're in a country with malaria or this or that, you start putting in all of your information. Heck, in the future, you could end up going on dating apps and it will tell you, oh, this person has this or this person has that. They want to have all health in the digital database. They want it to all be kind of a public thing. This is something that I was told a couple of years ago, and I didn't really kind of understand it. Now with this, it seems like part of that is kind of being implemented here with CV. CV, of course, was all of our lives for the last 5 months, and we've been locked down, and things and laws have changed. All sorts of things have changed. They've closed whole parts of the city to the public. They've taken away freedom of travel in some places due to this, and they say it's not going to stop even if the V goes away. So what do you guys think about this? Obviously, I don't want to be traced. I don't want to be tracked. Obviously, we know we have our phones. There's different ways to deal with it. Again, I would love to know what you guys think about this. Are you guys going to sign up for this? Or did you already sign up for this? Did you sign up for it and then right after it kind of thought about it? Or right after it heard everybody going, well, why'd you do that? And then you regret it. Because once you give them that permission, then you're walking around there tracing your every move, and they get to put it into a national database. Again, I'm not saying not to, but go ahead.
Yeah, so let me ask you this. Do you think it's just like we saw with the cameras and the emergency alert that you reported on over a year or so ago? Do you think that this is something that, I know it technically can be this, do you think it's something that actually just happens even if you don't opt into it? Right? Like it's just happening, and you may or may not be participating in it, or may not know that you're participating in it, but it's collecting that data, tracking where you've gone, tracking who you've been by, so that it may show it to you later if you choose to do it, but if you don't, they still know it, and they still know you.
So the thing with this is that that's upstream surveillance, and whether you like Snowden or not, some people think he's a hero, some people think he's a traitor, some people think he's a black hat, white hat, whatever you want to call him. He did talk about upstream surveillance, and before the October 3rd emergency presidential alert, that only reason why people cared is because they called it the presidential alert. That was actually less the president and more FEMA, the Federal Emergency. So that was them actually really the powerhouse behind that. And that alert that we were supposed to all get, which is kind of funny, right? Isn't it funny that only certain people got it? Certain, it was supposed to be every single person, burner phones, everything. Well, go fast forward to just a couple days ago where it was just certain areas were just turned off. Nobody could make calls. Nobody could make texts. Nobody's making a big deal of this. Just 2 days ago, up until yesterday, we had millions of phones not able to even call, emergency services. How is that not a huge deal? That's a gigantic deal. And people go over it, as long as it's fixed, boom, we forget about it. What about the fact that it was multiple carriers and everybody's phone service in certain areas or certain people were out? A wife and a husband, 2 different carriers, both out at the same time. At the same time, you've got aunt and uncle. One has one that's working, one that doesn't, and they're on 2 different ends of the spectrum. Kind of weird. Just some weird stuff that's going on here. Again, with this contact tracing, this is not only going to kick in more, this is going to be something that I believe, in my opinion, is going to play a part in everyone's lives, whether they like it or not. Like Dex says, this is just the first steps. This is the voluntary phase. I don't think it's going to actually stay like this. Again, with this and others, you can actually fight this. And we've worked with eDeck now, and we're actually going to show you this. So these are the way to protect it. You can actually help the show at the same time as doing it. I am now using this, so if you go to the store, if you go somewhere and you do not want your technology giving away your location for any reason, you can actually pop it in here. These things are absolutely amazing. Again, this is the same company that has worked with, DOD, FBI. What these things do is they actually cut off all signal, just to be simple about it. You can go through the fancy thermo-sealed everything else, but I'm telling you, these things are absolutely amazing. Dex and me had an awesome time literally just making phone calls and then literally putting the phone in, instantly gone, done, phone cuts off. These things are absolutely awesome. Again, these are something that I think that everybody in the Fugel family should be using.
Some of the tools that will be used for the contact tracing, like what I spoke about in the other video with the partnership of Apple and Google for contact tracing using our cell phones. It's pretty obvious that we have not yet gotten to the full potential of this crisis they have created, which leads me to my last point. Apple unveils their new operating systems. Now, Apple recently was giving a software update on their iPhones that said it was for important security updates and is recommended for all users. What they did not explain is that in the update, they were replacing their COVID-19 contact tracing functionality. Now, I do not have automatic updates on my phone, and you shouldn't either. You should know what the update is before you let it happen. But what I found interesting is just how clever Apple is. Right at the time where they're implementing a virus tracking system for all their users. Again, I spoke about this in the video, watch this before you decide to go back into society. Right as they start implementing this COVID-19 tracing functionality, they also decided to do a major revamp of their software and change things in a big way with how the phone works. Instead of relying on people on just taking the normal updates on their phone, they have made an enticing product that will draw people to their COVID-19 tracer automatically. People are excited about the changes that Apple has implemented and will gladly deal with the contact tracing functionality in order to have the latest iOS operating system. But this wasn't the biggest part to Apple's unveiling. The big part was that in this software unveiling, they were showing us a glimpse into how the world will be, and it really is scary. Now, when Apple was explaining all of it, I know to many it sounded exciting and convenient. Sometimes I was listening like, yeah, that's really cool. But then I had to snap out of it, because they are really making things convenient, but at a real cost that they are not explaining. You should be aware of what Apple is releasing, because if you look at things with the right perspective, you can really understand the world that we are moving into. They're adding so many features to our lives through our devices, from using our phones as car keys, to tracking our sleep, facial recognition at our door, and monitoring how long we wash our hands. Apple is truly making their way into our complete way of life. They talk a lot about privacy, and they keep reminding you that they care about it. But all of their devices and features of their devices literally invade our privacy. But because we are willing to utilize their offerings of convenience, we gladly forfeit our privacy demands. But they emphasize security in the conference, showing us that they are very careful on who they share our information with. But the big elephant in the room that I don't think many people are even noticing is that we are giving them, the company Apple itself, major access into our lives, and their imprint in our lives will only grow, not reduce. When they spoke about using the phone as car keys and how we can give others digital keys to our car and determine how much access in the car we want to give the other person, at first I was like, that's convenient. And then I said, wait, this means that I am giving programmable access of my car to Apple, and my Apple ID will be assigned to my automobile. So now Apple will fully know everything that is going on between me and my car. Where I am going, how fast I drive, where I stop, who I let drive my car, the temperature I like driving in. Everything. They said this will be the new standard in vehicles. When they said that they were adding dance as a feature to track on the activity monitor, I said, wow, that's good. That really is a good workout. Then I thought about it and said, They are tracking the movement of my arms and where it goes, and allows them to know that I am dancing. Like, if you're swimming, your watch will give you an alert and be like, "It looks like you're swimming. Would you like me to track this?" They aren't just counting calories and heartbeats. They are completely monitoring how I'm moving my body. I am letting Apple know exactly how I move. I don't like that. When they said their AirPods are able to give movie-like surround sound, I was like, that's dope. But then I kept listening, and they said it got challenging to keep the sound quality when we turned our head or moved the phone. So they use technology to track the motion of our heads, and they compare the motion data from our heads and our device's screen. Now that's creepy. And using AirPods and my device, Apple is tracking how I move my head. No thank you. They talk about tracking our sleep, waking us up with the watch and monitoring if we are achieving the right amount of sleep each night. So now, Apple knows what time I am going to sleep and what time I am waking up. The device is monitoring me while I'm sleeping too. No thank you. They're putting our whole lives on a digital server. They're making us like robots that can be tracked digitally. With their Apple Watch, they can tell if I'm washing my hands and give me a countdown to tell me how much longer I need to wash my hands. It tells me, "Job well done," when I wash my hands for 20 seconds. That's freaky. Plus, you have to really listen to what they're saying and what they're not saying. They said that they can hear that water is running, and based on the movement, they can tell that this is washing hands. But what they are leaving out is that, oh yeah, your watch is listening to what's going on. This new world should scare you. When they talk about using facial recognition with your video doorbell and making sure you know who is at your door or coming to your house, it sounds like a good feature. And then you start realizing, wait, so Apple is using the faces in my phone as facial recognition tool, and now they know who is coming to my house. Now Apple knows who's visiting my house. No thank you. I mean, I can go on and explain all the different things Apple is implementing. And from the surface, it sounded convenient, but when thinking deeper about it, you can see how this company is totally being used to turn controlling and tracking our lives into being convenient for us. You see that this new world that we are being transitioned into is here, and that we will gladly accept it for more convenience. The same company that is telling us that they care about our privacy is a company that is intent on gathering as much private information about us as possible. This is very dangerous. And to think that we are so willing just to hand over this information to companies like Apple and Google willingly really just shows that we are ripe for the takeover. Because just don't think that just because this is Apple, that Android users are not a part of this. Google is applying the same technologies, but they always just let Apple market it to the masses first, so there is general acceptance. This is the future, regardless if you're an Apple or Android user. That's why they only gave us 2 options with phones. Our devices are meant to be a bridge into the control aspect of the coming transition of the world. And if you really can't see that, based on all the information we will be giving these technology companies, you are not paying attention. These companies literally know more about us than we know about ourselves, and the systems are completely in place to monitor and regulate our lives.
It's the 4th of November 2017. And I can't not just touch on this iPhone X one more time briefly from the technological aspect of it, from the layman's view. You know, these are very, very cool gadgets, and they can do a great deal of things, but you're literally looking at a mirror into the beast. This is a technology that's going to literally entrap you even further than you already are. Okay? It's a black mirror. And I'm going to explain to you what I mean, because if you go to their page here, and if you observe how long this page is, well, if you go through the page, it pretty much wants to just tell you how great the cameras are, how great of photos it takes, how good the video is, on and on and on. Photos taken with the iPhone, the one eye symbolism, that's very suggestive, on and on and on. The one eye, the rainbow, yada yada yada, make what you will of that. The upside down, one eye. It's just ridiculous. But this is what I wanted to show you. And I don't think they really tell people exactly what they got in their hands when you buy one of these things for $1,000, which is ridiculous. Anyway, it employs a neural engine, okay? The A11 Bionic, capable of 600 billion operations per second. You need to really understand the power of this thing. CPU, so on and so on. It can watch you change and grow and get fat and old and everything, so on and so forth. More image, blah, blah, blah. Augmented reality. The A11 Bionic, the most powerful chip ever. Let's just go on a little bit here. 4.3 billion transistors. This, by the way, I assure you, without doubt, this employs the quantum technology in some way, shape, or form. Absolutely no question about it. Because this thing, this neural engine, is a hardware that's purpose-built for machine learning. Okay? You need to understand that. It's a type of artificial intelligence. It's going to enable your cell phone to learn from observation. So everything you do on here, particularly your photos, videos, audio, location, everything you do, quite literally, every single solitary thing you do with this device, everywhere it goes, so on and so forth, is going to be learning you better than you and your surroundings. And I promise you, it'll be communicating with other devices, with the 5G system in real time, and this thing is going to be your best friend for a short period, and then it's going to be your prison warden. And that's just the way it is, because this beast is learning humanity to the point where it is literally going to just tell you what to do, for lack of a better way to put it. You're handing away your sovereignty. You're giving away your ability to be a free human being when you partake in this system. It truly is that simple. There are little ways around it, but it's here. It's not going to be stopped. So what are you going to do? Well, I suggest at the very least, if you're going to carry a smartphone, get yourself a small pouch that blocks the signal when you're not using it. You at least give yourself a level of privacy, if you even care. But I'll tell you what, folks, this is a giant stepping stone in the building of this beast system, which will be employed sooner than later. So please prepare appropriately. Seek Christ Jesus, because he will show you the truth and give you great peace in times of, let's say, darkness. So, that being said, peace and grace to you all. Shabbat shalom. Many fish.
Finally, my brethren, be strong in the Lord and in the power of his might. Put on the whole armor of God, that ye may be able to stand against the wiles of the devil. For we wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against principalities, against powers, against the rulers of the darkness of this world, against spiritual wickedness in high places. Wherefore take unto you the whole armor of God.
To show what a cell phone does when it's put on airplane mode, and I feel that's a really important video that I should have got to you a long time ago. So basically, here's a very quick video. Now you're looking at the acoustometer, obviously on the right, and this acoustometer is turned on. So you can see I'm in a completely non-wireless environment. You see a tiny little blip of green on the left side of the meter showing up periodically because the cell phone is leaking out some amount of radiation. But right now the cell phone is on airplane mode. I'll show you what happens when I take it off of airplane mode. All right, so basically, I'm just turning the volume down. Basically, people are carrying their cell phones around all day long, ready to receive calls, ready to text, and this is the radiation. You can see the radiation topping the meter out in terms of peak signal strength, and it's getting up to 2,500 to 5,000 microwatts per square meter on average power density, and this is going into a person's body all day long, even when the cell phone's sitting on the passenger seat of your car. This is basically the radiation that everybody is exposing themselves to, even when they're not using the phone. Now, I come back and I put the phone back on airplane mode, and you can see the meter stops registering any microwave radiation. So I think this simple test will show you that the safest way to use a cell phone is to carry it with you during the day and put it on airplane mode. And then when you want to use the phone to receive some calls or to make some calls or to get your messages, then take it off of airplane mode and use it, and then put it back on airplane mode. So once again, this is an excellent test here because I am in a non-wireless environment. And I do see a tiny little blip of green showing up on the meter here. I don't know if you could, yep, there you go. So the phone is leaking a little bit of radiation. I don't know what that's about. However, as you can see, this is much better carrying the phone on airplane mode than when airplane mode is off and you're carrying your phone around naturally, and you can see that the phone is constantly exchanging data with a local cell tower, and this would be radiating through a person's body, whether it's in your purse, whether it's in your front or your back pocket, whether it's in your shirt pocket. This radiation is breaking through the blood-brain barrier and through the gut-brain barrier. So I would definitely suggest learning the very, very good habit, or practicing the very, very good habit of carrying your phone around on airplane mode until you're ready to use it. All right, I hope this is a good video for you and was a little educational. Thank you so much.
Aware at all of the current state of surveillance and what, if anything, has changed since your revelations?
Yeah, I mean, the big thing that's changed since I was in 2013 is now it's mobile first everything. Mobile was still a big deal, right? And the intelligence community was very much grappling to get its hands around it and to deal with it. But now people are much less likely to use a laptop than use a desktop than use, God, any kind of wired phone than they are to use a smartphone. And both Apple and Android devices, unfortunately, are not especially good in protecting your privacy. Think right now. You got a smartphone, right? You might be listening to this on a train somewhere in traffic right now. Or you, Joe, right now. You got a phone somewhere in the room, right? The phone is turned off, or at least the screen is turned off. It's sitting there. It's powered on. And if somebody sends you a message, the screen blinks to life. How does that happen? Right? How is it that if someone from any corner of the earth dials a number, your phone rings and nobody else's rings? How is it that you can dial anybody else's number and only their phone rings, right? Every smartphone, every phone at all, is constantly connected to the nearest cellular tower. Every phone, even when the screen is off, you think it's doing nothing, you can't see it because radio frequency emissions are invisible. It's screaming in the air, saying, here I am, here I am. Here is my IMEI, I think it's individual manufacturer's equipment identity, and IMEI, individual manufacturer's subscriber identity. I could be wrong on the breakout there, but the acronyms are the IMEI and the IMSI, and you can search for these things. They're two globally unique identifiers that only exist anywhere in the world in one place, right? This makes your phone different than all the other phones. The IMEI is burned into the handset of your phone. No matter what SIM card you change to, it's always going to be the same, and it's always going to be telling the phone network it's this physical handset. And the IMESI is in your SIM card, right? And this is what holds your phone number, right? It's basically the key, the right to use that phone number. And so your phone is sitting there doing nothing, you think, but it's constantly shouting and saying, I'm here. Who is closest to me? That's the cell phone tower. And every cell phone tower with its big ears is listening for these little cries for help and going, all right, I see Joe Rogan's phone, right? I see Jamie's phone. I see all these phones that are here right now. And it compares notes with the other network towers, and your smartphone compares notes with them to go, who do I hear the loudest? And who you hear the loudest is a proxy for proximity, for closeness, distance, right? They go, whoever I hear more loudly than anybody else, that's close to me. So you're going to be bound to this cell phone tower, and that cell phone tower is going to make a note, a permanent record, saying this phone handset with this phone number at this time was connected to me, right? And based on your phone handset and your phone number, they can get your identity, right? Because you pay for this stuff with your credit card and everything like that. And even if you don't, right, it's still active at your house overnight. It's still active, on your nightstand when you're sleeping. It's still whatever. The movements of your phone are the movements of you as a person, and those are often quite uniquely identifying. It goes to your home. It goes to your workplace. Other people don't have it. Sorry. And anyway, it's constantly shouting this out, and then it compares notes with the other parts of the network. And when somebody is trying to get to a phone, it compares notes, the network compares notes to go, where is this phone with this phone number in the world right now? And to that cell phone tower that is closest to that phone, it sends out a signal saying, we have a call for you. Make your phone start ringing so your owner can answer it. And then it connects it across this whole path. But what this means is that whenever you're carrying a phone, whenever the phone is turned on, there's a record of your presence at that place that is being made and created by companies. It does not need to be kept forever, and in fact, there's no good argument for it to be kept forever, but these companies see that as valuable information, right? This is the whole big data problem that we're running into, and all this information that used to be ephemeral, right? Where were you when you were 8 years old, Where'd you go after you had a bad breakup? Who'd you spend the night with? Who'd you call after? All this information used to be ephemeral, meaning it disappeared, right? Like the morning dew, it would be gone. No one would remember it. But now these things are stored. Now these things are saved. It doesn't matter whether you're doing anything wrong. It doesn't matter whether you're the most ordinary person on Earth, because that's how bulk collection, which is the government's euphemism for mass surveillance, works. They simply collect it all in advance in hopes that one day it will become useful. And that was just talking about how you connect to the phone network. That's not talking about all those apps on your phone that are contacting the network even more frequently, right? How do you get a text message notification? How do you get an email notification? How is it that Facebook knows where you're at? You know, all of these things, these analytics, they are trying to keep track through location services on your phone, through GPS, through even just what wireless access points you're connected to, because there's a global, constantly updated map. There's actually many of them of wireless access points in the world, because just like we talked about, every phone has a unique identifier that's globally unique. Every wireless access point in the world, right? Your cable modem at home, whether it's in your laptop, every device that has a radio modem has a globally unique identifier in it. And this is a standard term. You can look it up. And these things can be mapped when they're broadcasting in the air, because, again, like your phone says to the cell phone tower, I have this identifier. The cell phone tower responds and says, I have this identifier. And anybody who's listening, they can write these things down. And all those Google Street View cars that go back and forth, right? They're keeping notes on whose Wi-Fi is active on this block, right? And then they build it into a giant map. So even if you have GPS turned off, right? As long as you're connected to Wi-Fi, those apps can go, well, I'm connected to Joe's Wi-Fi, but I can also see his neighbor's Wi-Fi here, and the other one in this apartment over here, and the other one in the apartment here. And you should only be able to hear those 4 globally unique Wi-Fi access points from these points in physical space, right? The intersection in between the spreads, the domes, of all those wireless access points. And it's a proxy for location. And it just goes on and on and on. We could talk about this for 4 more hours. We don't have that kind of time.
Can I ask you this? Is there a way to mitigate any of this personally? I mean, shutting your phone off doesn't even work, right?
Well, so it does in a way. It's yes and no. The thing with shutting your phone off that is a risk is, how do you know your phone's actually turned off? It used to be when I was in Geneva, for example, working for the CIA. We would all carry like drug dealer phones. The old smartphones, old dumb phones. They're not smartphones. And the reason why was just because they had removable backs where you could take the battery out, right? And the one beautiful thing about technology is if there's no electricity in it, right? If there's no go juice available to it, if there's no battery connected to it, it's not sending anything, because you have to get power from somewhere. You have to have power in order to do work. But now your phones are all sealed, right? You can't take the batteries out. So there are potential ways that you can hack a phone where it appears to be off, but it's not actually off. It's just pretending to be off, whereas in fact it's still listening in and doing all this stuff. But for the average person, that doesn't apply, right? And I got to tell you guys, they've been chasing me all over the place. I don't worry about that stuff, right? And it's because if they're applying that level of effort to me, they'll probably get the same information through other routes. I am as careful as I can, and I use things like Faraday cages. I turn devices off. But if they're actually manipulating the way devices display, it's just too great a level of effort, even for someone like me, to keep that up on a constant basis. Also, if they get me, I only trust phones so much. So there's only so much they can derive from the compromise. And this is how operational security works. You think about what are the realistic threats that you're facing, that you're trying to mitigate. And the mitigation that you're trying to do is what would be the loss, what would be the damage done to you if this stuff was exploited. Much more realistic than worrying about these things that I call voodoo hacks, right, which are like next level stuff. And actually, just a shout out for those of your readers who are interested in this stuff. I wrote a paper on this specific problem. How do you know when a phone is actually off? How do you know when it's actually not spying on you? With a brilliant, brilliant guy named Andrew Bunny Huang. He's an MIT PhD in, I think, electrical engineering. called the introspection engine that was published in the Journal of Open Engineering. You can find it online. And it'll go as deep down in the weeds, I promise you, as you want. We take an iPhone 6, this was back when it was fairly new, and we modified it so we could actually not trust the device to report its own state, but physically monitor its state to see if it was spying on you. But for average people, right, this is academic. That's not your primary threat. Your primary threats are these bulk collection programs. Your primary threat is the fact that your phone is constantly squawking to these cell phone towers. It's doing all of these things because we leave our phones in a state that is constantly on. You're constantly connected, right? Airplane mode doesn't even turn off Wi-Fi really anymore. It just turns off the cellular modem. But the whole idea is we need to identify the problem. And the central problem with smartphone use today is you have no idea what the hell it's doing at any given time. Like, the phone has the screen off. You don't know what it's connected to. You don't know how frequently it's doing it. Apple and iOS, unfortunately, makes it impossible to see what kind of network connections are constantly made on the device and to intermediate them, going, I don't want Facebook to be able to talk right now. I don't want Google to be able to talk right now. I just want my secure messenger app to be able to talk. I just want my weather app to be able to talk. But I just checked my weather, and now I'm done with it, so I don't want that to be able to talk anymore. And we need to be able to make these intelligent decisions on not just an app-by-app basis, but a connection-by-connection basis, right? You want, let's say you use Facebook, because, for whatever judgment we have, a lot of people might do it. You want it to be able to connect to Facebook's content servers. You want to be able to message a friend. You want to be able to download a photograph or whatever, but you don't want it to be able to talk to an ad server. You don't want it to talk to an analytics server that's monitoring your behavior, right? You don't want it to talk to all these third-party things because Facebook crams their garbage into almost every app that you download, and you don't even know what's happening because you can't see it, right? And this is the problem with the data collection use today, is there is an industry that is built on keeping this invisible. And what we need to do is we need to make the activities of our devices, whether it's a phone, whether it's a computer, whatever, more visible and understandable to the average person, and then give them control over it. So, like, if you could see your phone right now, and at the very center of it is a little green icon that's your, handset, or it's a picture of your face, whatever, and then you see all these little spokes coming off of it. That's every app that your phone is talking to right now, or every app that is active on your phone right now, and all of the hosts that it's connecting to. And you can see right now, once every 3 seconds, your phone is checking into Facebook, and you could just poke that app, and then boom, it's not talking to Facebook anymore. Facebook's not allowed. Facebook's speaking privileges have been revoked, right? You would do that. We would all do that. If there was a button on your phone that said, do what I want, but not spy on me, you would press that button, right? That button does not exist right now. And both Google and Apple, unfortunately, Apple's a lot better at this than Google, but neither of them allow that button to exist. In fact, they actively interfere with it because they say it's a security risk. And from a particular perspective, they actually aren't wrong there. But it's not enough to go, we have to lock that capability off from people because we don't trust they would make the right decisions. We think it's too complicated for people to do this. We think there's too many connections being made. Well, that is actually a confession of the problem right there. If you think people can't understand it, if you think there are too many communications happening, if you think there's too much complexity in there, it needs to be simplified. Just like the president can't control everything like that, if you have to be the president of the phone and the phone is as complex as the United States government, we have a problem, guys. This should be a much more simple process. It should be obvious. And the fact that it's not, and the fact that we read story after story, year after year, saying all your data has been breached here, this company's spying on you here, this company's manipulating your purchases or your search results, or they're hiding these things from your timeline, or they're influencing you or manipulating you in all of these different ways, that happens as a result of a single problem. And that problem is an inequality of available information. They can see everything about you, they can see everything about what your device is doing, and they can do whatever they want with your device. You, on the other hand, owned the device. Well, rather, you paid for the device, but increasingly these corporations own it. Increasingly these governments own it. And increasingly we are living in a world where we do all the work, right? We pay all the taxes, we pay all the costs, but we own less and less. And nobody understands this better than the youngest generation.
Well, it seems like our data became a commodity before we understood what it was. It became this thing that's insanely valuable to Google and Facebook and all these social media platforms. Before we understood what we were giving up, they were making billions of dollars. And then once that money is being earned and once everyone's accustomed to the situation, it's very difficult to pull the reins back. It's very difficult to turn that horse around.
Precisely, because the money then becomes power.
Right.
The information then becomes influence.
That also seems to be the same sort of situation that would happen with these mass surveillance states. Once they have the access, it's going to be incredibly difficult for them to relinquish that.
Right. Yeah. No, you're exactly correct. And this is the subject of the book. I mean, this is the permanent record, and this is where it came from. This is how it came to exist. The story of our lifetimes is how intentionally, by design, a number of institutions, both governmental and corporate, realized it was in their mutual interest to conceal their data collection activities, to increase the breadth and depth of their sensor networks that were sort of spread out through society. Remember, back in the day, intelligence collection in the United States, even in SIGINT, used to mean sending an FBI agent, right, to put alligator clips on an embassy building, or sending in somebody disguised as a workman, and they put a bug in a building. Or they built a satellite listening site, right? We call these foreign satellite collection. Where out in the desert somewhere, they built a big parabolic collector, and it's just listening to satellite emissions, right? But these satellite emissions, these satellite links, were owned by militaries. They were exclusive to governments, right? It wasn't affecting everybody broadly. All surveillance was targeted because it had to be. What changed with technology is that surveillance could now become indiscriminate. It could become dragnet. It could become bulk collection, which should become one of the dirtiest phrases in the language if we have any kind of decency. But we were intentionally, this was intentionally concealed from us, right? The government did it. They used classification. Companies did it. They intentionally didn't talk about it. They denied these things were going. They said, you agreed to this, and you didn't agree to nothing like this. I'm sorry, right? They go, we put that terms of service page up, and you clicked that. You clicked a button that said, I agree, because you were trying to open an account so you could talk to your friends. You were trying to get driving directions. You were trying to get an email account. You weren't trying to agree to some 600-page legal form that even if you read, you wouldn't understand. And it doesn't matter even if you did understand, because one of the very first paragraphs in it said, this agreement can be changed at any time unilaterally without your consent by the company, right? They have built a legal paradigm that presumes records collected about us do not belong to us. This is sort of one of the core principles on which mass surveillance, from the government's perspective in the United States, is legal. And you have to understand that all the stuff we talk about today, the government says everything they do is legal, right? And they go, so it's fine. Our perspective as a public should be, well, that's actually the problem, because this isn't okay. The scandal isn't how they're breaking the law. The scandal is that they don't have to break the law. And the way they say they're not breaking the law is something called the third-party doctrine. Third-party doctrine is a legal principle derived from a case in, I believe, the 1970s called Smith versus Maryland. And Smith was this knucklehead who was harassing this lady, making phone calls to her house. And when she would pick up, he'd just, I don't know, sit there heavy breathing, whatever, like a classic creeper. And, you know, it was terrifying, this poor lady. So she calls the cops and says, one day I got one of these phone calls, and then I see this car creeping past my house on the street, and she got a license plate number. So she goes to the cops, and she goes, is this the guy? And the cops, again, they're trying to do a good thing here. They look up his license plate number, and they find out where this guy is, and then they go, well, what phone number is registered to that house? And they go to the phone company, and they say, can you give us this record? And the phone company says, yeah, sure. And it's the guy. The cops got their man, right? So they go arrest this guy, and then in court, his lawyer brings all this stuff up, and they go, you did this without a warrant. That was the problem. Was they went to the phone company and they got the records without a warrant. They just asked for it, or they subpoenaed it, right? Some lower standard of legal review. And the company gave it to him and got the guy. They marched him off to jail. And they could have gotten a warrant, right? But it was just expedience. They just didn't want to take the time. The small town cops, you can understand how it happens. They know the guy's a creeper. They just want to get him off to jail. And so they made a mistake, but the government doesn't want to let it go. They fight on this. And they go, it wasn't actually, they weren't his records. And so because they didn't belong to him, he didn't have a Fourth Amendment right to demand a warrant be issued for them. They were the company's records, and the company provided them voluntarily, and hence no warrant was required, because you can give whatever you want without a warrant as long as it's yours. Now here's the problem. The government extrapolated a principle in a single case of a single known suspected criminal who they had real good reasons to suspect was their guy, and used that to go to a company and get records from them and establish a precedent that these records don't belong to the guy, they belong to the company. And then they said, well, if one person doesn't have a Fourth Amendment interest in records held by a company, no one does. And so the company then has absolute proprietary ownership of all of these records about all of our lives. And remember, this is back in the 1970s. You know, the internet hardly exists in these kind of contexts. Smartphones, don't exist. Modern society, modern communications don't exist. This is the very beginning of the technological era. And flash forward now 40 years, and they are still relying on this precedent about this one, pervy creeper to go, nobody has a privacy right for anything that's held by a company. And so long as they do that, companies are going to be extraordinarily powerful, and they're going to be extraordinarily abusive. And this is something that people don't get.
Writing, stop talking about technical stuff, just tell me what gear to buy. And people do that even in the training videos about guns. But a radio or a gun is not a magical talisman that just protects you and helps you just because you have it. You have to know how it works. You have to actually have a plan that you're trying to accomplish and know how you're going to use that tool to accomplish that plan. And so let's get some of the boring stuff out of the way. So this right here is the radio frequency spectrum. Not to scale. So these are our highest frequencies and these are our lower frequencies, but officially speaking, for the purpose of the video, this band right here is what is technically called high frequency, very high frequency, ultra high frequency, and I'm assuming this is ludicrous frequency.
Ludicrous speed, go!
So down here we have the HF band, which ham radio guys can use to communicate. Then in VHF, we have a whole bunch of things going on. So right here around the 100 megahertz section is FM radio that you listen to in your car. 120 megahertz is the aviation bands. And then we start to get to the stuff that we're allowed to use. So ham radio frequencies sitting in here, some business band frequencies, BERS. Up here we get to UHF, some ham frequencies. And then as the radio frequencies go even higher, you get to communicate a lot more data, but you get less range. So up here is where you have cell phones. Up here is where you have GPS. Here is your slow Wi-Fi, 2.4 gigahertz. Here is your fast Wi-Fi, 5.8 gigahertz. And then people are just moving in this direction. 5G cell phone signals are supposed to go up to 50 gigahertz, which is truly a ludicrous frequency. It's this close to being heat and this close to being light, which means that a single leaf will block that signal. That's why they're talking about putting 5G radio towers every 500 feet, which is crazy. That's about as close as my closest neighbor. But if we talk too much more about 5G, YouTube is going to cancel the video for some reason. So let's go back to VHF and UHF radio. UHF radio. There's a tendency inside of our community to want to buy whatever the military or high-end law enforcement units are using. And they tend to be moving in this direction where there's more data but less range. And they get around that by using a ton of infrastructure. So the Los Angeles Sheriff's Department has about 10,000 deputies. And when you do that, you want to use digital radios in this spectrum that have a huge amount of data capacity and work more like cell phones. And that works if you have the budget for a whole bunch of repeater towers. And then the way that the military does radio is amazing because of the infrastructure that they have. They have fixed and mobile repeaters, they have man-portable repeaters, they have drones and helicopters and planes, AWACS, satellites. And so don't buy into that system if you cannot support the entire infrastructure. You need to come up with a radio solution that's going to fit the actual infrastructure that you have access to, which, if you're anything like me, is not much. Now, before we get into some of the practical aspects, let's talk about legality. The good news is that listening is always legal. If people send radio signals into your house, you are allowed to listen to those. But when it comes to broadcasting, there are some rules. So if you want to broadcast in UHF with UHF walkie-talkies, there's a sliver of frequency that is available to you to use called FRS. This allows you to broadcast on fairly low power radios that, even though they advertise an estimated range of 35 miles, it's going to be more like half mile or a quarter mile. But these radios are cheap, they're very easy to come by, and they're free to use. Then in VHF, there's a block of frequencies called MERS. Same thing, more powerful radios. This frequency, because it's a lower frequency, goes further, and this is freely available as well with no licensing. And then down here in the HF band, sort of, is CB radio. I wouldn't actually spend much time on this because it's not a low enough frequency to take advantage of some of the most powerful parts of HF, but it is something that you can freely use. The next step up is a ham radio license, and that will let you broadcast on a whole bunch of amateur bands, from stuff way up here all the way down to 160 meters and lower. In order to get that, though, you do need to get the license. You have to be tested for the license, and even though it's a pretty easy test to pass, it's hard to find anyone that is actually doing the testing right now. But it's very possible that because no one's doing the testing right now, the FCC will finally let people take the amateur radio test online. So keep an eye open for that. Once you have your ham radio license, you're able to use this band on UHF, which hams call 70 centimeters because they like to use different names for stuff. And there's a big chunk of spectrum down here in the 2-meter band. But then there's a whole bunch of very cool HF bands. We've got 10 meters, 20 meters, 40 meters, 80 meters, and 160 meters. And that lets you do some extremely cool stuff, because once you get down into these very low frequency, which again, they're called high frequency because the radio spectrum keeps going that way. But once you get down to those lower frequencies, the radio waves start to behave differently. They start to bounce off of the ionosphere. You're actually able to skip your radio signal off of the atmosphere and off of the surface of the planet halfway around the globe or further. So once you move down into this part of the radio spectrum, you have the ability to talk a lot further than in here. With a handheld radio, you're able to go a mile or two regular analog on the ham radio bands pretty easily. You can switch to mobile radios, which gives you considerably more wattage, and it's much easier to use a bigger antenna, and that gives you more range. But in order to talk to people that are in the next state or the next country or the next continent, you need to be playing in this area. Now let's say you've got a group of guys and they're not all going to get their ham radio licenses, but you still want to be able to talk to each other. There is a third option, which is an itinerant business band frequency. You can buy a license to use a portion of the spectrum that's been set aside for business use, which is great. It's something that we at T-Rex are doing because technically you're not allowed to use amateur bands for commercial purposes. So we have these itinerant business band frequencies over here that we are able to use once we buy that license. And the other cool thing about that license is that not every single person in the business needs to go get the license. Once the business has it, everybody can broadcast on those frequencies for that business. And the other thing is that encryption is legal. One of the downsides with the amateur radio bands is you're not allowed to encrypt your traffic. And there's reasons when you might want to do that. And that's something that broadcasting on these itinerant business frequencies will let you do. Okay, so now is the part where I tell you which radio to buy, except not exactly. This is the equivalent of one of those cheap Walmart FRS radios. It is UHF only. I prefer it to the Walmart radios because it charges over USB. It has the Kenwood adapter for speaker mics and stuff that I'm already using. This is an extremely affordable option if all you want to do is low power UHF.
Welcome.
The next option would be a dual band radio. This is one of the ubiquitous Baofangs, not a UV5R, but inside it's basically the same thing. This will let you listen and talk on all of the UHF and VHF bands that you're allowed to as a ham radio guy, and you can program them to talk on the FRS frequencies, but technically you're not supposed to because it has a removable antenna, which is against the rules for those frequencies. You can also get really tiny versions of dual band radios. When I was a volunteer firefighter, I carried this everywhere, and it couldn't always hit the repeater, but I could pretty much always hear calls going out. So the great thing about these analog radios is the simplicity. If you just go to a frequency, either by programming it on a computer or typing it into the front panel if you have a keypad, you're on that frequency and you can hear everything, and if you broadcast, you can talk on that frequency. There's not much to it. But there are a couple of downsides. One is there's not a lot of privacy, and the other is that analog modes are not quite as efficient as digital voice modes. So for digital modes like D-Star, Fusion, or DMR, you get a bit more range, you get some error correction, and theoretically you also are saving some battery. You also have the option to get encryption on top of that, but not if you're on the amateur bands, remember. So this radio is a little bit bigger and chunkier than I would like, but it has everything in it. It's got GPS, it's got Bluetooth, so I can use it with a headset, but also a Bluetooth push-to-talk thing. This digital radio is basically an old Nokia. You can also send APRS messages. So text messaging over radio on this should go 3 or 4 times farther than voice. And it's front panel programmable so that it's great for tinkering with. Now, it's technically not sturdy enough that I would run it with Kit or give it to Lucas, but there's a whole bunch of DMR radios that are more affordable and sturdier, and that's what we're experimenting with at T-Rex right now. The next step up in terms of range, but also price, is HF radio. HF radio gives you considerable advantages, but it also takes a lot more power. It's bigger and clunkier, but there's just so much more that you can do with it when it comes to talking to people far away. So this is a mobile radio that could easily go in a car or be built into some kind of backpack system, which is my plan for it. This is a 20-watt radio, and if I throw this 50-foot antenna up in a tree, I can probably talk to most of the United States and a big chunk of Europe on 20 watts of power most of the time, but certainly I can cover all of those areas at night when the HF bands actually work a little better. So with a setup like this, I could actually do a huge amount. All of the digital handheld radios also work in analog mode, so I'd be able to listen to regular FM traffic and talk to people on different analog ham bands and hit repeaters and all the same stuff that the Baofangs could do. And then with this HF radio, I'd be able to do a huge amount of long-range stuff. Voice, Morse code, digital modes. This is more expensive to get into, but it's also much harder to learn how to use properly and get set up. But even if that is outside of your price range and the time that you have to learn it, you can still do an awful lot with the cheaper stuff. If all you had was an analog dual band radio and an HF receiver, you could accomplish quite a bit. Remember when I said that listening to radio broadcast is always legal? It's also a lot simpler and easier. So this HF receiver is probably capable of picking up almost everything that HF mobile radio is, especially if I throw a smaller speaker wire antenna up into a tree. It cannot broadcast, but I would be able to hear all kinds of things and even plug it into my phone or a computer and try to decode some of the digital modes that are out there. One of the cool things about this is if you put rechargeable batteries in it, you can recharge it over USB. So depending on what it is that I'm trying to do, this setup is extremely capable. So now you need to think through a little bit more about what you want to accomplish with your radios. If this is you, or in this case, this is me, I want to be able to talk to friends who are nearby. So I need to get them all radios that operate inside of this range. Now, when I was a firefighter, we had a large run area that was the entire county. And because we had a repeater, I was able to talk to people who were further away. If your radio plan requires you to coordinate with people that are further away, then you need to figure out a way to do that. If you already have a plan with your guys that says, in the event of an emergency, a tornado, a disaster of some kind, come to this area where all of our radios are within range of each other, then all you need is this capability. But if your plan with radios, like mine is to help people, I also want to be able to listen to folks that are outside of my group that may have FRS radios, that may have MERS radios, that may have CB radios who are asking for help. They may not have power, they may not have cell phone, they may not have the ability to travel away from their homes, and so they've dug through their attic and they found a couple of those terrible blister pack FRS radios to call for help on. So I want to be able to have a second radio that can listen to these guys. So I want a wider radio net that lets me listen and talk to people that are further away. And then I want a smaller net that's people that I already know and trust, and that's my TAC net. Now, for those of you who are about to jump on the comments and criticize me for talking about tactics when I've never actually even been in the Army, you should know the TAC channel is not short for tactical, but it stands for talk around channel. It's a smaller, low power radio channel that lets you talk around the repeater frequency. But that being said, it's all for tactics. So for this small circle of TAC radios, I'm going to be using my itinerant business band frequency and DMR digital radios with encryption. Then for this group here, I want to be listening on several frequencies. I forgot to mention it before, but just outside of the regular VHF and UHF MERS and FRS frequencies, just a little bit higher frequency, are a block of frequencies that are generally set apart for EMS, volunteer fire. Now, a lot of ambulance services, fire services, police, they're going to have trunked systems that are encrypted and you won't be able to listen in. But some of them will be open and free to listen to. And by listening to these frequencies, you'll be able to get a better picture of what's going on in your area. So I want to be able to have the ability to listen to these, which I can do with actually any radio. But in order to talk to some of these people in the wider area, I actually am going to need to use my ham license for that. And then when it comes to talking to people in other states, that's where things get really interesting. I'm going to be using an HF radio plugged into a computer, and I'm going to be using a digital mode called JS8 call. I want you to research this, and there's some guys on AR15.com that are already building a mesh network of guys who are communicating with each other state to state using text messages on JS8 call using very, very low power. Now, I can't stress enough how important it is that you think about this plan now before there's a disaster. If your plan is just to buy a cheap Chinese radio, leave it in the box until your power goes out, then try to read the manual, then try to get it charged, then try to scan through some of these bands and hope that you can find somebody to talk to, that's not going to go real well for you. While the internet is still working, and if you're watching this video, I guess it is, now is when you should be doing your research and your study. And even if you don't do complicated digital encryption type stuff, you still want to spend some time learning about these radios and how radio basically works. If you were to hear this signal, would you know what to do to understand it?
Wait.
Sir, I am fluent in 6 million forms of communication. This signal is not used by the Alliance. It could be an Imperial code.
It's a good bet the Empire knows we're here.
So right now, I would like you to go to a couple YouTube channels. The first is Ham Radio Crash Course, and Josh can explain all of this stuff much better than I can and in a lot more detail. And if you're interested in the super long range, super low power digital communication modes, you need to check out OH8STN. He's in Finland and he's talking to people on the other side of the world with 12-volt batteries recharged from solar panels. It's extremely cool stuff. So the other thing that I'd recommend that you do for research, there are SDRs, which are software-defined radios, and that's a whole nother video in itself. They're actually shared on the internet. So you can log on to a Kiwi SDR and you can actually see and listen to huge swaths of the spectrum before you buy anything. So while the internet is still up, I want you to take advantage of the opportunities that you have to study and learn this stuff before you actually need it. And more important than the technical research is going to be building this little community, this group of guys. Radio is an incredibly powerful tool for coordinating with people. You need some people in this group who can help you get out and help other people in time of disaster. But you also want to be able to talk to people in the wider community. You probably want to get in touch with your local EMS and EMA guys and figure out what frequencies of radio they are on so that you can communicate with them. And then there's going to be wider groups out there. There's going to be people like Eris and Races, other amateur radio guys further away who are trying to help in terms of disaster. If you can figure out how to coordinate with all of these folks, you'll be so much more informed and so much more effective in times of trouble. But the most important thing that you can really be working on at this point is building this core group of guys right here. The people who are the trusted members of your group that are going to help you out. Now is the time that you should be building this group of people who you know and trust and can work together. And once you know the strengths and weaknesses of the people in the group, and you know the goals that you have as a community, then you can start to build out not just your equipment, but your actual communication system so that you can accomplish those goals.